Chapter 1: The Obsidian Lens. The heat was a physical weight. It pressed down from a bleached white sky, radiated up from the cracked salt, and hung in the air like a shimmering curtain. From his perch, a shallow cave carved by ancient winds into the face of a rust-colored mesa, Caleb Vance saw it all. He did not mind the heat. He saw it as a purifier, an instrument of clarity. It burned away the non-essential. His eye was pressed to the rubber cup of his spotting scope. The instrument was his own creation, a hybrid of German optics and a custom-ground objective lens of pure, flawless obsidian. It did not gather light in the traditional sense. It seemed to drink it, leaving behind an image of impossible sharpness, stripped of the atmospheric haze which fooled lesser glass. Through it, the world below, a blinding pan of hexagonal salt plates stretching to the curve of the earth, became his laboratory. His subject for the past 36 hours was a man named Cade Jennings. Caleb did not care about the name, which he had learned from a monogrammed bag the man had foolishly left visible on the passenger seat of his garish yellow Jeep. To Caleb, he was Subject C4, young, fit, arrogant, the type who saw the desert not as a power to be respected, but as a backdrop for his own vanity. Caleb had watched him for a full day before acting. He watched him fly a noisy, wasp-like drone. He watched him pose for a camera on a tripod, flexing his muscles against the sunset. He watched him drink precious water without thought. On the second morning, before the sun had risen high enough to cook the air, Caleb had made his descent, a 10-mile hike performed with the practiced economy of a marathon runner. He carried a small, heavy pack containing only water, a condensed nutrient bar, and his tools. He reached the Jeep, parked precariously close to a soft shoulder, and went to work. He did not smash or vandalize. His methods were surgical. A single, razor-thin cut to the lower radiator hose, placed where the escaping coolant would mist away almost instantly on the hot engine block. A similar incision in the spare tire. And the master stroke, a tiny, powerful neodymium magnet dropped into the fuel tank. It would cling to the fuel pump, disrupting the impeller with just enough intermittent interference to cause a stall miles from anywhere, a failure which would appear perfectly mechanical. He was back in his perch before Subject C4 had even woken from his sleeping bag. Now he watched the endgame. The yellow Jeep stood 100 yards from the inert body of its owner. C4 had made all the predictable mistakes: panic, wasted energy trying to fix the unfixable, a futile attempt to walk for help in the midday sun. Caleb had tracked his slow, stumbling progress through the obsidian lens. He had seen the man drop his phone, then his camera, then a uselessly empty water bottle. He had watched him fall, get up, and fall again. Caleb turned a small, knurled knob on the side of the scope, refining the focus. He could see the man's face, turned towards the sky, lips cracked and blackened. The skin on his arms was a violent red. Even at this distance of 2.3 miles, the lens denied the heat haze its distortion. It was a perfect, clear image of failure. He reached for a leather-bound logbook and a fountain pen. He opened it to a fresh page, ignoring the previous entries with their neat columns and clinical observations. He uncapped the pen and began to write, his script a model of obsessive precision. Subject C4, male approx. 25–30 years, excellent physical condition. Vehicle, Jeep Wrangler modified. T plus 0, vehicle failure at 0917. Location, Basin Sector 7. Subject exhibits initial confusion followed by anger, wasted energy attempting repairs. T plus 4, subject consumes remaining water supply, poor discipline. T plus 7, subject abandons vehicle, cardinal error, direction of travel due west towards mirage of mountains. T plus 9, first signs of severe heat exhaustion, ataxia, visible disorientation. Subject begins speaking to himself. It is at this stage, I hypothesize, the mind projects an externalized source for its suffering, a watcher in the wastes, the shimmer man. Caleb paused his writing. He scanned the shimmering horizon around the fallen man. There was nothing, of course, only the salt and the sky. The shimmer man was a fiction, a phantom limb of the psyche reaching for a reason. Yet the idea pleased him. It gave his observation a sense of mythology. He was not merely a man with a scope. He was the unseen force, the spirit of the sun, the thing they imagined in their last, desperate moments. T plus 11. Subject discards equipment, stumbles repeatedly. T plus 12. Cessation of movement at 21:48. Expiration presumed. He closed the book. The experiment was complete. The data was recorded. He took a slow sip of his own water, tasting the cool, metallic purity. He swept the scope away from the body, panning across the vast, empty canvas. It was a sterile environment perfect for his work. No witnesses, no complications, only cause and effect, sun and flesh, hubris and dust. His methodical scan continued, moving east. The salt plates gave way to a dirt track, barely visible, which connected to the distant ribbon of asphalt locals called the loneliest highway in America. His lens followed the highway. A truck, a sedan, and then something else. Caleb's hand tightened on the focus knob. A dark green truck, a heavy-duty model with scientific equipment mounted on the roof rack. It was moving slowly, purposefully. It turned off the highway, onto the same dirt track subject C4 had used. It crawled into his laboratory. Inside, he could make out two figures. He swiveled the scope back to the west, towards the setting sun. High above, a single turkey vulture with a distinctive bald patch over its left eye, a missing patch of feathers giving the impression of a missing eye circled in the thermals. Caleb watched it for a moment. He called it Old One-Eye, his silent, feathered confidant, the only other witness to his work. The vulture seemed to dip a wing in acknowledgement before drifting eastward towards the approaching truck. A new experiment was beginning. Caleb Vance opened his logbook to a fresh page. He uncapped the pen. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the salt flats in hues of orange and violet. It was beautiful in a detached, clinical way. He wrote the header for his new entry, subject D1 and D2. Chapter 2, County Line Blues. The air conditioner in Deputy Kenna Washington's patrol car was fighting a losing battle. It wheezed out a stream of air which was only slightly less hot than the oppressive atmosphere of the sheriff's office parking lot. She killed the engine, and the illusion of relief vanished, replaced instantly by the baking stillness of a high desert afternoon. Dispatch, this is 4 Adam 30. Show me at the station. 10:30. A voice crackled from the radio, tinny and bored. Kenna swung the door open and stepped out. The heat rose from the asphalt in visible waves. She pulled her wide-brimmed hat down. The dark felt already warm to the touch. The Indio County Sheriff's Department was a one-story brick building from the 1970s, squat and charmless. It was responsible for a territory larger than the state of Delaware, most of it empty, sun-scorched earth. Inside, the cool was a shock. Sheriff Brody Miller sat behind his metal desk, a monument to weary inertia. His uniform was strained at the buttons, his face was florid, and he was staring at a crossword puzzle as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Anything?" she asked, hanging her keys on a hook by the door. Domestic dispute out on Route 6. Tammy threw a toaster at her old man again, third time this month. Miller didn't look up from his paper, and Dispatch got a call from some vlogger outfit in California. One of their boys is missing. Name of Cade Jennings. Kenna poured herself a cup of bitter, burnt coffee from the pot in the corner. Missing how? Was supposed to check in yesterday. He's out here taking pictures of. Nothing, Miller grunted. Posted a video 2 days ago from the Salt Flats. His mommy got worried when he missed his scheduled FaceTime. They pinged his phone, but it's dead. Company pinged his Jeep's GPS. Found it 20 miles east of the highway, deep in the pan. Kenna stopped, the cup halfway to her lips. Deep in the pan. Nobody goes out there without a damn good reason. This kid's reason was something called desolate aesthetic, Miller said, finally putting the paper down. He sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. I told them it's 110 in the shade and there ain't no shade. Kid probably got his fancy truck stuck, went for a walk and cooked his goose. Happens every couple of years. You want me to take a run out there? Nah, let's give it till morning. Let it cool down. If he's still not answering, we'll go take a look. Probably find him under a salt bush. The casual dismissal pricked at Kenna. She had grown up here. She understood the desert's casual lethality. It wasn't a place for maybes and waiting. Sheriff, if he's alive, waiting till morning might be the difference. Miller looked at her, his eyes tired. Kenna, the kid's Jeep has been sitting in the same spot for over 24 hours. If he was alive, he'd have fixed it or walked back to the highway. He did neither. Go do your paperwork. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Kenna bit back a retort. Brody was a good man, but he was coasting to retirement. He saw problems in terms of the paperwork they generated. She saw a set of coordinates in the middle of a killing field. She retreated to her own, smaller desk and tried to focus on filing a stolen livestock report, but the image of the stationary GPS dot stuck in her mind. The next morning, as predicted, there was no word. Miller sighed, drained his coffee, and tossed Kenna the keys to the county's heavy-duty pickup. All right. Go see what you can see. Take the sat phone. And for God's sake, take extra water. The drive was long and straight. The asphalt shimmered, creating phantom lakes which vanished on approach. Kenna turned onto the dirt track Miller had indicated. The truck's tires churned up a plume of fine, white dust. After 40 minutes of crawling over the cracked earth, she saw it. A splash of bright yellow against the endless white. She parked a good 50 feet away and got out. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, only the faint hum of the heat in her ears. She approached the Jeep cautiously. The driver's side door was ajar, swinging slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel. The interior was messy, filled with empty energy bar wrappers and camera equipment. No signs of a struggle. She began a circular search pattern, her boots crunching on the salt crust. The tire tracks told a simple story. The Jeep had driven here and stopped. There were no skid marks, just a single set of footprints leading away from the driver's door. A man's boots. The prints were deep and clear, heading west. She followed them. They were erratic. The stride was long at first, then shortened. A scuff mark here, a deeper impression there where he must have stumbled. About 200 yards from the Jeep, she found a high-end smartphone, its screen cracked, lying on the salt. Another 50 yards, a GoPro camera detached from its mount. She knelt, careful not to disturb the scene. She bagged the camera as evidence. The footprints continued, growing more desperate, more chaotic, until they faded into a series of scuffs and depressions which the wind had already begun to soften. There was no sign of the man. Kenna returned to the Jeep for a more thorough look. She was no master mechanic, but she knew the basics. She popped the hood. The engine was clean, almost new. She checked the belts, the battery terminals. Everything seemed fine. She was about to close the hood when she saw it. A faint greenish stain on the chassis directly below the lower radiator hose. She leaned in closer. The hose looked intact, but when she ran a gloved finger along its underside, she found it. A perfect, straight slit, almost invisible. It wasn't a burst from pressure. It looked like a cut, a deliberate, precise cut. A cold prickle ran down her spine, a feeling completely at odds with the searing heat. This wasn't an accident. She pulled out the county sat phone to call it in. She raised the antenna and powered it on. The screen flickered, searching for a signal. Then a single message appeared in stark black letters: no service. She frowned. This was a dead zone. She knew there were spots, but this deep in. She tried again, the same result. She was alone out here, truly alone. She looked around. The horizon was a flat, unbroken line in every direction. The sun beat down. She felt a sudden primal sense of being watched. She scanned the distant mesas, the empty sky. Nothing. Only the salt, the silence, and a single dark bird circling lazily high above. She had a sudden, irrational thought it was missing an eye. Shaking her head, she got back in her truck, locked the doors, and placed the bagged GoPro on the passenger seat. The abandoned Jeep in her rearview mirror shrank until it was just another distortion in the shimmering air. Miller was wrong. This wasn't a simple accident. This was a scene, and the main actor was still missing. Chapter 3: A Map of Salt and Stone. Lithium concentrations are highest in the C7 quadrant, according to the satellite thermal imaging, Dr. Anya Sharma said, tapping a stylus against the tablet mounted to the dashboard of the survey truck. We'll establish a baseline camp here, at the edge of the pan, and push into the quadrant for core samples tomorrow. Sounds like a plan, boss, Ben Carter replied, his hands easy on the steering wheel. Just tell me when to stop driving and start digging. Ben, 26 and brimming with the casual confidence of a man who had never faced a problem he couldn't charm or muscle his way through, saw the expedition as a paid adventure. Anya, 2 decades his senior, saw it only as a data set waiting to be collected. She had spent her career in desolate places, the Atacama, the Gobi, the empty quarters of Saudi Arabia. She understood the impersonal nature of such environments. They did not care about confidence or charm. They responded only to preparation and respect. "Pull over by that outcropping," she instructed. "It will give us a modicum of a windbreak should a squall kick up." Ben guided the heavy-duty Ford F-250, customized for geological survey work, to the spot. The engine rumbled to a stop, and the sudden quiet pressed in. For a moment they both sat, adjusting to the immense scale of the silence. They worked with an efficiency born of practice. Anya directed, Ben supplied the labor. They erected a small, heavy-duty canvas tent, anchored with deep spikes into the hard-packed earth at the edge of the salt flats. They set up a folding table for their equipment and a solar array to charge their instruments and the satellite phone. "See that?" Ben gestured with his chin as he unloaded cases from the truck bed. About a mile away, a strip of yellow police tape fluttered from two metal poles, cordoning off a distant, bright yellow Jeep. "Looks like somebody had a worse day than us." Anya glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "A common occurrence. People underestimate the flats." "Think we should check it out?" Ben asked, a hint of ghoulish curiosity in his voice. "It's a police matter," Anya said, her tone final. "Our survey area is to the east. We will not be distracted." Ben shrugged. "Your funeral, or you know not." She ignored his attempt at humor. Her focus was on the task at hand. By late afternoon, their camp was established. A small, self-sufficient island of technology in a sea of ancient salt. As the sun began its descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the pan, Anya retrieved a pair of powerful binoculars from a pelican case. She methodically scanned the horizon, a habit from years of field work. She surveyed the terrain, noting geological features, potential hazards, and access routes for the next day's work. Her gaze swept across the eastern mesas miles away. The setting sun lit their faces in fiery shades of red and orange. Then she saw it, a brief, impossibly bright flash. A pinpoint of light like a star had momentarily fallen to Earth. It wasn't a natural reflection. A reflection from quartz or mica would have shimmered, a softer gleam. This was a hard, sharp glint, like sunlight hitting a piece of polished, man-made glass, a lens. She held the binoculars steady, trying to find it again, but it was gone. The spot where it had appeared was nothing but shadowed rock. "What is it?" Ben asked, noticing her stillness. Anya lowered the binoculars slowly. "I'm not sure, probably just a reflection off some mineral deposit." But she didn't believe it. The precision of the glint felt wrong. It felt like an eye opening and closing in an instant. She chalked it up to fatigue from the long drive, an optical illusion in a land famous for them. But the image of the pinpoint of light was burned into her mind. Night fell. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, but the air remained unnervingly still. The sky, free from any light pollution, was a breathtaking dome of stars, so dense and bright they seemed to have weight. Ben sat by the truck, trying to find a radio station, getting only static. Anya sat at the table, reviewing seismic data on her tablet, but her attention kept drifting to the dark shape of the mesas on the horizon. She felt a prickle of unease she could not name or rationalize. It was a feeling she had learned to trust over the years, a primal instinct which warned of unseen predators or unstable ground. Here, in this vast emptiness, it made no sense. There were no large predators. The ground was solid. Still, the feeling persisted, a low-frequency hum of wrongness just beneath the surface of the quiet. She pushed it aside, attributing it to the unsettling presence of the abandoned jeep, a stark reminder of the desert's unforgiving nature. She had a job to do, data to collect. There was no room for phantoms. She would proceed as planned. Chapter 4: The Logic of Failure. Dawn broke with a silent, clinical efficiency, spilling pale light across the salt. Anya was already awake, sipping hot tea from a thermal mug while she ran a final diagnostic on the ground-penetrating radar unit. Ben emerged from the tent, stretching and yawning, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "Ready to poke the planet, boss?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Load the core sampler and the seismic gear. We'll start with a transect 5 miles due east," Anya instructed, all business. "We'll be back before the heat peaks." They packed the truck quickly and set off. The vehicle's oversized tires crunched over the salt plates, the only sound in the morning stillness. Ben drove while Anya navigated, her eyes on the tablet's GPS display. The landscape was mesmerizing in its monotony, a white desert under a blue dome. It was easy to lose one's sense of scale and direction. They were about 4 miles from their camp when the engine sputtered. Ben frowned. What was that? The engine coughed again, a sick metallic sound. The truck lost power, coasting to a silent halt. Ben turned the key. The starter whirred, but the engine wouldn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. "Damn it," he muttered, popping the hood release. "Must be a vapor lock, or the fuel filter picked up some gunk." They both got out. The sun was already gaining strength, its heat radiating from the truck's metal hood. Ben, confident as ever, began checking the usual suspects. Anya, more methodical, started with the basics. "Fuel gauge reads full," she stated, leaning into the cab. "Yeah, I topped it off before we left town," Ben said from under the hood. "Spark plugs look fine, batteries good." Anya walked the perimeter of the truck, her eyes scanning the ground. She wasn't a mechanic, but she was a master of observing physical systems. She knelt by the rear driver's side tire, her gaze tracing the path of the fuel line along the truck's chassis. And there it was, a dark, wet patch on the salt crust directly beneath the line. It was small, already evaporating. She reached under, her gloved fingers finding the braided steel of the fuel line. It was wet with gasoline. She traced its length until she found the source. It was not a crack. It was not a rupture from a flying rock. It was a cut, a clean, precise severance, as if made with a pair of industrial shears. The two ends of the line were separated by a quarter-inch gap. "Ben," she said, her voice low and even. "1 sec, I think I found it," he grunted, still leaning into the engine bay. "Looks like the—" "Ben, get over here, now." The command in her voice cut through his concentration. He straightened up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, and walked over to where she knelt. She pointed. He squatted, his eyes following her finger. He saw the wet patch, the severed line. His confident expression dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. "What the hell?" he whispered. "How is that even possible? Did we run something over?" "Look at the cut," Anya said, her voice tight. "There's no tearing, no stress marks, it's a clean shear." Ben stared at it, the implications slowly dawning on him. A failure like this wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone had done this. He stood up and looked around wildly at the empty expanse. Who? Why? There's nobody out here. Anya stood as well, her mind racing, connecting dots she hadn't even realized were there. The abandoned jeep, the police tape, the glint of light from the mesa. It wasn't a series of random events. It was a pattern. From his perch, Caleb Vance watched the scene unfold through the obsidian lens. He had followed them at a distance, waited for them to drive far enough from their camp, and then activated the device. It was a simple, elegant mechanism. A small, battery-powered hydraulic shear clamped to the fuel line, triggered by a radio signal. He had attached it to the truck's undercarriage the night before while they slept. He opened his logbook. Subject D1 male Carter and D2 female Sharma now stranded at quadrant C9. Vehicle disabled at 0732. D1 exhibits agitation, confusion, externalizes blame, standard reaction. D2 exhibits controlled response, immediately identifies the sabotage. Her analytical skills are impressive. She will be a more challenging subject. Caleb watched them. They were talking now, their gestures growing more animated. The man was pointing, packing. The woman was still, her posture rigid. She was thinking. He preferred it when they were thinking. It made the eventual breakdown all the more compelling. Back at the truck, Anya pulled out the satellite phone. "We need to call for help." Ben scoffed. "Who are we gonna call? The ghost who cut our fuel line?" "The sheriff," she snapped, powering it on. "This is a crime scene." The screen lit up. Searching, searching. The same message as before appeared, stark and final, no service. Ben's face went pale. "It's not working. Why is it not working?" "It's a dead zone," Anya said, the words tasting like ash. The glint of light wasn't a reflection, it was an observation post. The sabotage wasn't random vandalism, it was a trap, and they had walked right into it. They were not stranded, they were captured. The desert around them was no longer an empty space, it was the wall of a cage. Chapter 5: An Audience of One. The first day of their imprisonment was a study in contrasts. Ben's response was kinetic. He paced, he cursed, he kicked at the truck's tires. He burned through his anger and his energy, leaving him slumped in the thin shade of the truck by early afternoon, sullen and defeated. Anya's response was internal. She sat on the truck's tailgate, forcing herself to be still, to think. She inventoried their supplies with meticulous care. "We have 12 gallons of water," she announced, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. 2 first aid kits, 16 high-protein nutrient bars, 4 emergency flares. At our current rate of consumption in this heat, the water gives us 72 hours. Maybe 96 if we are completely inactive at night. "And then we die?" Ben asked, his voice raw. That's your brilliant plan, to sit here and die slowly. The plan is to conserve resources until we have a clear advantage, Anya retorted, her patience wearing thin. Walking in this heat is suicide. We wait for night. We wait for the temperature to drop. And then what, Anya? Walk 50 miles in the dark, with some psycho watching us from the hills. Anya had no answer for that. The watcher was the variable she couldn't solve for. Every option she considered, walking, staying, splitting up, was filtered through the chilling certainty of that unseen observer. They were specimens in a jar, and someone was tapping on the glass. The sun crawled across the sky, a merciless white orb. The salt flats became a mirror, reflecting the heat until it seemed to come from all directions at once. The heat haze began to play tricks on their eyes. Distant shapes writhed and shifted. The horizon itself seemed to vibrate. Around 3 o'clock, Ben saw it first. "What is that?" he croaked, pointing a trembling finger to the west. Anya followed his gaze. In the shimmering curtain of air, a figure seemed to be standing. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its form distorted and elongated by the heat. It was too far away to make out details, but it was undeniably the shape of a man. It was perfectly still. "It's a mirage," Anya said, her own voice less certain than she wanted. "An atmospheric distortion." "It looks like it's watching us," Ben whispered. They stared at the figure for a long time. It did not move. It did not waver. It just stood there, a dark slash against the blinding white. The Shimmer Man. The name surfaced in Anya's mind unbidden. It was a phantom, a trick of light and heat on an overstressed optic nerve. She repeated this to herself like a mantra, but the primitive part of her brain screamed a different story. It screamed predator. From his perch, Caleb smiled. He was not standing on the salt flats. He was sitting comfortably in his cave, watching them through the obsidian lens. The figure they were seeing was a superior mirage, a common phenomenon in the basin, but their minds, primed by fear and isolation, were giving it agency. They were creating their own ghost. He made a note in his logbook. T+7. Subjects have observed the Fata Morgana effect. D1 vocalizes fear. D2 attempts rationalization, but her posture indicates distress. The psychological component of the experiment is proceeding ahead of schedule. He lifted his gaze from the scope to the sky. Old One-Eye was there, circling high above the stranded truck. The vulture had been there all day, a patient, orbiting speck of black. Caleb felt a sense of companionship with the bird. They were the only two beings for 100 miles who understood what was happening. The audience. He the director, the vulture his sole critic. As the sun finally began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in lurid oranges, the Shimmer Man vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The release of tension was so abrupt it left them both feeling weak. Silence descended again, thicker and more menacing than before. The coming of night was not a comfort. It just meant their watcher would be hidden by the dark. "I can't do this," Ben said, his voice cracking. He stood up, his face set in a mask of grim determination. "I can't just sit here and wait for that thing to come for us, or to die of thirst. I'm walking. As soon as the sun is down, I'm heading for the highway." "Ben, don't be a fool," Anya said, getting to her feet. We don't know what's out there. We are safer here with the truck." "Safer," he laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "This truck is a coffin, Anya. It's the bait in a trap. At least out there I have a chance. I'm a fast runner. I can cover ground." "You're dehydrated and exhausted. You won't last 5 miles. "It's better than lasting 0 miles sitting here," he shot back, his eyes wild. He began stuffing 2 bottles of water and a handful of protein bars into a small backpack. The decision was made. His fear of waiting had finally overcome his fear of the unknown. Anya watched him, a cold dread seeping into her bones. If he left, her chances of survival plummeted. If she went with him, she was abandoning the relative safety of the truck and committing to his reckless plan. She was trapped between a terrible decision and an impossible one. He was creating a schism, forcing the experiment into a new, more dangerous phase. Caleb watched the conflict with detached interest. He zoomed in on Anya's face. He saw the struggle there, the cold logic battling with rising panic. This was the moment, the fulcrum upon which survival and demise balanced. He made another note. T+12. D1 has resolved to abandon the site. This forces a choice upon D2. Her reaction will determine the next stage of observation. He leaned back from the scope content. The sun was gone. The desert was awash in the deep purple of twilight. The first stars were appearing. The day's performance was over. The night's was about to begin. Chapter 6. A Division of Two. The twilight deepened, the last vestiges of color bleeding from the sky to be replaced by a cold, stardusted black. The temperature dropped with surprising speed. A faint breeze whispered across the flats, kicking up tiny grains of salt which stung like insects against any exposed skin. It was the only sound besides the ragged rhythm of Ben's breathing as he cinched the straps on his backpack. "This is it," he said, his voice a low, determined rasp. He refused to look at Anya. His gaze was fixed on the eastern horizon where the faint glow of distant, unseen towns promised a world away from this nightmare. "I'm heading due east. I'll follow our tracks back to the dirt road. Can't miss it." Anya stood with her arms crossed, a silent, rigid figure by the truck's front fender. "You're making a mistake, Ben, a fatal one." "Staying here is fatal," he countered, his voice rising. "What, you think he's just going to let us sit here until we're rescued? He cut the fuel line. He's got a scope. This is a game to him. The only way to win is to flip the board." "This isn't a game, it's a hunt," she said, her own voice dangerously quiet. "And you're about to leave the only cover we have." "It's not cover, it's a cage," he finally shouted, turning to face her. His eyes were wide in the faint starlight, reflecting a frantic, desperate energy. "I'm not dying in a cage, Anya. I'll die running." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and started walking, his steps purposeful, crunching loudly on the salt crust. Each footfall sounded like a gunshot in the immense quiet. Anya watched him go, a profound sense of failure washing over her. She couldn't stop him. She couldn't save him from his own fear. She watched until his silhouette was swallowed by the darkness. For a long, terrifying moment, she was tempted to call out to run after him. The thought of being left alone was a physical pain, a hollow ache in her chest. But her logic, the cold, hard discipline of her mind, held her in place. He was right about one thing: the Watcher was playing a game, and splitting up was a move, a predictable move. The prey scatters. The predator chooses the weakest target. By staying, she was making herself less of a target, or so she hoped. She retreated into the cab of the truck, locking the doors. The familiar interior, which had felt like a trap hours before, now seemed like a fortress, however flimsy. She could see nothing outside but the reflection of her own pale face in the glass. The universe had shrunk to the dimensions of the Ford F-250. Outside was the domain of the Watcher. From his mesa, Caleb Vance adjusted the settings on his scope. He swapped the standard eyepiece for a night vision unit. The world bloomed into a grainy, ethereal green. The white salt flats became a glowing plain. He found the truck easily, a dark, cold shape. He panned east, searching for the other subject. It took him less than a minute. Ben was a bright green figure moving steadily against the darker ground. He was making good time, his stride long and confident. Caleb watched him for a while, a scientist observing a mouse navigating a maze. The subject was acting precisely as predicted. The initial burst of defiant energy, the flight response. It was classic. It was also pointless. Caleb turned his attention back to the truck. D2 Anya was not visible. She was inside, conserving energy, thinking. He respected her discipline, but it wouldn't save her. He preferred to observe one subject at a time, to give each his undivided attention. Ben had volunteered to go first. With unhurried movements, Caleb packed a small, lightweight rucksack. He slung a rifle over his shoulder. It wasn't for shooting. It was a tranquilizer rifle, loaded with a potent custom-brewed cocktail of edorphine and carfentanyl, designed for large game. He clipped a small, powerful flashlight to his belt, one fitted with an infrared filter, invisible to the naked eye. He was not a creature of the day. The desert at night was his true element. He left the scope and the logbook in the cave. The observation phase was temporarily suspended. Now began the interactive phase. He moved down the winding, rocky path from his perch with the silent, sure-footed grace of a mountain goat. Once on the flats, his boots made no sound on the salt. He began to run, a slow, steady jog, his breathing controlled, his eyes scanning the green-tinged darkness ahead. He was not chasing Ben. He was simply moving to intercept him, his path a calculated vector which would cross his subjects in approximately 45 minutes. The hunter was on the move. Chapter 7: The Sound of Whispers. An hour after Ben left, the adrenaline that had sustained his defiant march began to fade, replaced by a gnawing, creeping dread. The initial confidence born from action had evaporated into the vast, dark emptiness. He was an island of warmth and fear in an ocean of cold, indifferent salt. He stopped panting and took a long pull from one of his water bottles. It was already half empty. He had been walking fast, too fast, and sweat drenched his shirt despite the cool night air. He looked back. He could no longer see the truck. He looked forward. He could see nothing but an endless plain of darkness. The silence pressed in on him, so total it felt like a pressure against his eardrums. He started walking again, slower this time. Every crunch of his boots seemed to echo for miles. He began to hear things. A faint skittering sound to his left, which he told himself was just a lizard. A soft, sighing noise on the wind, which he rationalized as air moving over the salt formations. Then he heard the whispers. It started so faintly he thought he was imagining it. A sibilant, hissing sound like a radio tuned between stations. It seemed to come from all directions at once. He stopped again, straining his ears, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound faded. He took a step and it returned, a soft, dry rustle of voices, too faint to make out any words. SSSHHSSSHHSSSHHSSSH. Hello, he called out, his voice cracking. Is someone there? The only answer was the echo of his own voice, swallowed by the immense space. He started walking faster, almost jogging. The whispering grew louder, keeping pace with him. It sounded like it was coming from just behind his shoulder. He spun around, his eyes wide, searching the darkness. Nothing, just the flat, empty expanse under a billion uncaring stars. He was losing his mind. It was the stress, the dehydration, the silence playing tricks on him. It had to be. He turned and kept walking, his fists clenched, trying to block out the sound. But it persisted, a constant, maddening chorus of dry, incomprehensible whispers. Caleb was less than 100 yards behind him now, moving in a parallel line. He had the device in his hand. It was a small, directional ultrasonic generator. It emitted a high-frequency sound wave which, when bounced off the crystalline salt structures at the right angle, created an auditory illusion, a phenomenon known as the ghost voice effect. It simulated the sound of whispering directly in the listener's ear canal. It was a beautiful tool for psychological warfare. He watched Ben through a pair of night vision goggles. The subject was clearly agitated. He kept looking over his shoulder. He was beginning to run in short, panicked bursts. His carefully chosen straight line of travel was becoming a wavering, erratic path. He was being herded, though he didn't know it. Herded away from the dirt road, deeper into the basin. Caleb allowed him to run for another 10 minutes, letting the fear and confusion marinate. He watched the man's energy reserves drain away, his panicked flight becoming a clumsy, stumbling shuffle. When the time was right, Caleb increased the frequency on the generator. The whispers in Ben's ears sharpened into distinct, cold words. The wrong way. Ben froze, a gasp catching in his throat. He had heard it clear as day. I can't run. Who's there? He screamed, spinning in a tight circle. Show yourself, you bastard. The water's almost gone. The voice was inside his head. It knew. He grabbed his remaining water bottle. It was terrifyingly light. He had been drinking without thinking, his fear driving his thirst. Anya can't help you. Panic pure and absolute seized him. He broke into a dead sprint, running blindly into the darkness, away from the voice, away from everything. He ran with the last of his strength, his lungs burning, his legs pumping like pistons. He ran until he tripped over something, a raised lip of salt, and went down hard, sprawling onto the unforgiving surface. The impact knocked the wind out of him. His water bottle flew from his hand, skittering across the salt and bursting open, its precious contents instantly absorbed by the thirsty ground. He lay there gasping for air, the rough salt crystals biting into his palms and cheek. The whispers stopped. The silence rushed back in, more terrifying than the noise. He had no water. He was lost. He was being hunted by a ghost. He pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, tears of frustration and terror tracing clean paths through the grime on his face. He was done. He had lost the game. Caleb watched the breakdown from a distance of 50 yards. He lowered the ultrasonic generator. The subject was primed. He unslung the tranquilizer rifle, the smooth, cool stock settling comfortably against his cheek. He peered through the night vision scope, the green crosshairs centering perfectly on the kneeling, defeated figure. He exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. Chapter 8: A Knock at Midnight. Inside the truck, Anya had fallen into a fitful, shallow sleep. Her body, desperate for rest, had finally overridden the frantic hum of her mind. She dreamed of numbers, of geological charts where the contour lines twisted into screaming faces. She dreamed of the glint of light from the mesa, an unblinking eye in a face of stone. She was startled awake by a sound, a single sharp thump. Her eyes snapped open. The cab was pitch black, her heart was pounding. She held her breath, straining to hear. Had she dreamed it? Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the back of the truck, a slow, rhythmic knocking on the metal of the cargo bed. It wasn't frantic. It was patient, measured. She didn't move, she didn't breathe. Her logical mind, her greatest asset, was frozen by a primal, absolute terror. Ben wouldn't knock, he would shout. A rescue party wouldn't knock. They would use a bullhorn. This was something else. This was the Watcher letting her know he was here, letting her know the flimsy metal shell of the truck was no protection at all. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was louder now, more insistent. It was the sound of a large rock or a fist striking the tailgate. She imagined a tall, thin figure standing in the darkness just feet from her, its form lost in the night, its presence a palpable weight. The Shimmer Man. She slowly, silently reached for the tire iron she had wedged beside the driver's seat. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than her bare hands. Her mind raced, calculating odds, formulating plans, but every scenario ended with the sound of breaking glass and a shape pouring into the cab. The knocking stopped. The silence which followed was 1,000 times worse. It was a silence filled with anticipation. Anya's knuckles were white where she gripped the tire iron. She scanned the windows, trying to pierce the suffocating darkness, but saw only her own terrified reflection. Where was he? What was he doing? Then a new sound, a soft scraping noise. It came from directly overhead, from the roof of the cab. Scrap, scrap. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the metal. She stifled a scream, clamping a hand over her mouth. He was on the roof. He had climbed onto the cargo bed and then onto the roof of the cab. He was directly above her. She could almost feel his weight pressing down, the slight groaning of the truck's suspension. She was trapped, cornered. The feeling of utter helplessness was a physical nausea. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind refusing to process the horror of her situation. Any moment the door would be wrenched open. Any moment a window would shatter. But nothing happened. The scraping stopped. The silence returned. She waited, every nerve ending screaming for what felt like an eternity. A minute, 10 minutes, an hour. The sky outside began to soften, the impenetrable black giving way to the deep indigo of pre-dawn. Slowly, shakily, she lowered the tire iron. Her muscles ached from the tension. The sun began to rise, spilling its weak, initial light over the flats. The world outside the truck's windows resolved itself from terrifying darkness into empty, sterile white. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then another. Had he gone? Was it a psychological game, a simple act of terror to break her spirit? She waited until the sun was fully above the horizon, flooding the landscape with light before she dared to move. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. She had to know what he had been doing. She had to see. She pushed the door open and cautiously stepped out. The morning air was cool and clean. She looked at the tailgate. There were several deep dents in the metal, fresh scratches marring the paint. She walked around the truck, her eyes scanning for any other sign. There was nothing. No footprints besides her own and Ben's from the day before. It was as if her tormentor had been a ghost. Then she looked up at the roof. Lying neatly in the center of the cab's roof, perfectly aligned with the truck's chassis, was Ben. He was curled on his side in a fetal position as if asleep. His face was peaceful, his eyes closed, but his skin had a strange, waxy pallor and a thin line of dried blood trickled from one nostril. His backpack was gone. His shoes were gone. He was just placed there, an offering, a trophy, a message. Anya's mind simply shut down. The scream which had been trapped in her throat all night finally tore its way out. A raw, ragged sound of pure, unadulterated horror which was swallowed instantly by the vast, indifferent silence of the salt flats. Chapter 9: The County Man. Sheriff Brody Miller hated the paperwork most of all. Each missing person, each accident, each domestic squabble generated a mountain of forms, each one a testament to human folly. The file for Cade Jennings, the vlogger, was getting thicker. The kids' parents were calling every 6 hours. The production company he worked for was threatening to send their own private investigators. And now, another one. A geology survey company, Geocore. Their check-in with their field team, a Dr. Anya Sharma and her assistant, Benjamin Carter, was 24 hours overdue. Their emergency beacon had not been activated, but their company's GPS tracker showed their vehicle stationary in the same godforsaken salt basin as the vlogger's Jeep. 2 cars in the same damn spot, Miller muttered to himself, staring at the map on his wall. A big red pin marked the location. It was a place locals avoided, a part of the flats known for bad luck and strange magnetic anomalies which threw compasses off. Old Jedediah Stone called it the Crying Basin, claiming the wind there sounded like a woman weeping. Miller just called it a pain in the ass. Deputy Kenna Washington stood in the doorway of his office. "You want me to take another run out there, Sheriff?" Miller sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "Yeah, I guess you'd better, but this time you're not going alone." He picked up his phone and dialed. "Grant, it's Brody. Yeah, I'm fine. Listen, I might have something for you. Another one, out in the basin." An hour later, Grant Hemlock's battered Ford Bronco pulled into the station's parking lot. Hemlock was a man carved from the desert itself. lean, weathered, with pale blue eyes which seemed to see right through you. He had been the head of the county's volunteer search and rescue team for 20 years, until his nephew's truck was found abandoned in the Crying Basin a year ago. The boy was never found. Grant had quit the team the next day, but he never quit searching. "What have you got?" Grant asked, bypassing any pleasantries as he stepped into Miller's office. He moved with a quiet, predatory intensity which made the sheriff uneasy. Miller laid out the situation. 2 vehicles, 3 missing people, all in the same area. Kenna added her report about the cut radiator hose on the first Jeep. Grant listened, his expression unchanging. When they were finished, he simply nodded. "I'll drive." They took his Bronco. It was better equipped for the terrain than Kenna's patrol truck. The back was loaded with survival gear, extra fuel, and a winch. Grant drove with an effortless precision, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't speak much. He just watched the landscape, his eyes missing nothing. "Heard anything from old Jedediah lately?" Grant asked Kenna, his voice a low rumble. "Saw him at the diner last week," Kenna replied. "Bought a month's worth of canned beans and jerky. Said the salt was singing again. Said it was a bad sign." Grant grunted. He had a grudging respect for the old salt harvester. Jedediah Stone had been out here longer than anyone. He saw things. He knew the desert's moods. They found the Geocore truck easily. It stood silent and inert in the blinding midday sun. From a distance, it looked perfectly normal. Grant pulled the Bronco up about 100 feet away and killed the engine. "Stay here," he told Kenna. "Let me have a look first." He got out, pulling a pair of binoculars from his dashboard. He scanned the truck, then the area around it. He was methodical, his gaze sweeping in slow, concentric circles. He focused on the truck itself, lingering on the roof. His posture went rigid. "Kenna," he said, his voice flat and hard over the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Get on the horn to Miller. Tell him to dispatch state police and a forensics unit. We have a confirmed 10-7. A 10-7, deceased person. Kenna's blood ran cold. "Who is it, Grant?" "It's the boy, the assistant." Grant lowered the binoculars, his face a grim mask. And this was no accident. He was placed. He slung a rifle over his shoulder and began walking towards the truck, his movements slow and deliberate, like a soldier advancing on a minefield. Kenna watched him go, her hand shaking as she reached for the satellite phone. Unlike the last time this far out from the basin's center, the phone worked. As she relayed the grim news to a stunned Sheriff Miller, she kept her eyes on Grant. She saw him circle the truck, his head tilted back, looking at the roof. She saw him kneel, examining the ground. Then he stopped. He was looking east, towards the distant mesas. He raised his binoculars again, holding them steady for a long time. "What is it?" Kenna's voice crackled over his radio. "Company," Grant said, his voice a low growl. "We're being watched." He lowered the binoculars and keyed his radio again. "Kenna, stay in the vehicle, lock your doors. Do not get out for any reason. Do you understand me?" "Grant, what did you see?" There was a pause. Then Grant's voice came back, colder than she had ever heard it. "I saw a glint of light from the top of that far mesa. Sunlight on a lens. Someone's up there with a scope." Chapter 10. The Salt Hermit's Wisdom. The forensics team arrived 6 hours later, a slow-moving caravan of official vehicles disrupting the sacred silence of the flats. They worked under powerful floodlights as dusk settled, their movements efficient and sterile. They documented, photographed, and finally, with a quiet reverence, removed Ben Carter's body from the roof of the truck. Grant Hemlock stood apart from the official activity, a solitary figure watching the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. He had already done his own sweep of the area. He found the severed fuel line on the survey truck, a mirror image of the sabotage on the vlogger's Jeep. He had found a single, faint boot print 100 yards out which didn't match the victim's shoes, a print made by a heavy, military-style boot with a distinctive tread pattern. And he had found the point where the killer had used the terrain to his advantage, a slight depression which would have hidden his approach until the last moment. This wasn't a madman. This was a predator who knew his hunting ground intimately. As the coroner's van pulled away, its taillights shrinking in the darkness, Sheriff Miller walked over to Grant. "Anything?" Miller asked. "He's smart," Grant said, not taking his eyes off the distant mesas. "He's patient. He uses the desert as a weapon, disables their vehicles, separates them, then uses the heat and the fear to break them down before he moves in." "What about the woman, Dr. Sharma?" Grant shook his head. "No sign of her. No tracks leading away from the truck except the boys. She's either in the truck or he took her." Kenna, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "The cab's locked from the inside. We looked. She's not in there. If she was, she would have responded when we arrived." "Then he has her," Grant said, his voice grim. "He left the boy as a message, a warning." Miller sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We'll set up a search grid at first light, air support from the state police." "He'll see them coming from 50 miles away," Grant countered. "He's had all day to move her. He could be anywhere." He turned to Miller, his pale eyes glinting in the floodlights. "There's only one person who might know where someone could hide out here." An hour later, Grant's Bronco rumbled down a barely there track, its headlights cutting through a cloud of salt dust. They were heading for the far western edge of the flats, a place where the salt gave way to rocky, inhospitable badlands. Tucked into a narrow canyon was a shack, cobbled together from scavenged wood, corrugated metal, and sun-bleached tarps. A thin curl of smoke rose from a crooked stovepipe. This was the home of Jedediah Stone. As they pulled up, the shack's door creaked open. A man emerged, silhouetted against the dim lantern light from within. He was tall and skeletal, with a wild mane of white hair and a beard which reached his chest. He held a rusty double-barreled shotgun pointed at the ground, more as a statement than a direct threat. "Sheriff," Jedediah rasped, his voice like rocks grinding together, "you wouldn't be out here this time of night unless the devil was chasing you." "Evening, Jedediah," Miller said, stepping out of the Bronco with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "We need to talk." They went inside. The shack was one room crammed with sacks of salt, jars of preserved food, and stacks of old books. It smelled of wood smoke, bacon, grease, and something else, the dry, dusty smell of the desert itself. Grant laid it out for him. The two disabled vehicles, the dead boy, the missing woman, the watcher on the mesa. Jedediah listened, his eyes dark and sharp as a raven's fixed on Grant. He stroked his long beard, his gnarled fingers tracing the white strands. When Grant was finished, the old man was silent for a long time. He shuffled over to a large, hand-drawn map of the flats which was pinned to one wall. It was a masterpiece of obsessive detail, covered in his spidery handwriting, nodding geothermal vents, hidden springs, and strange magnetic fields. "The crying basin," Jedediah whispered, his finger tapping the area where the trucks were found. "A bad place. The salt is thin there. The ground underneath is hungry." "We're not looking for folklore, Jade," Miller said, his patience thin. "We're looking for a man, a place he could be hiding. A cave, an old mine shaft, anything." Jedediah's finger moved across the map, tracing a line from the basin towards the northern mesas. "Most folks think the mesas are solid rock. They ain't. They're like honeycomb, old lava tubes, wind caves. A man could get lost in there forever or hide forever." His finger stopped on a specific mesa, one marked with a small, skull-like symbol. This one, the locals used to call it the Watcher's Throne. Said you could see the whole world from up there. They were afraid of it. Left offerings. "Never went up there after dark." "Why?" Kenna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jedediah turned from the map, his dark eyes seeming to look right through her. "Because they say something lives up there, something that ain't human, something that watches, and when it gets bored of watching, it comes down from the rock and hunts." He looked at Grant. "Sounds like it got bored." Chapter 11. The Cave of Echoes. Anya awoke to darkness and the smell of damp stone. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. She tried to move, but her hands were bound behind her back, her ankles tied tight. She was lying on a rough, cold surface. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she forced it down. She was a scientist. She would observe. She would collect data. She would survive. She strained her senses, trying to build a picture of her prison. The air was cool and still, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the flats. The darkness was not absolute. A faint, ambient light filtered in from somewhere, just enough to reveal that she was in a cave. The walls were rough-hewn rock, and the ceiling was a low, oppressive arch a few feet above her face. A memory surfaced through the fog in her head, the tranquilizer dart. She remembered seeing Ben fall, the soft hiss of the rifle, and then a sharp sting in her shoulder. She remembered a figure approaching, tall and indistinct against the green glow of night vision, a face hidden behind goggles and a mask. She remembered being lifted, a surprising strength in her captor's arms. Then nothing. "Hello," she called out, her voice absorbed by the stone. It came out as a dry croak. She was desperately thirsty. There was no answer. She was alone. She began to work on her bonds. The rope was thick and coarse, the knots professional and tight. She twisted her wrists, testing for any slack, but there was none. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost its meaning in the unchanging twilight of the cave. The only sound was her own breathing and the frantic beat of her own heart. She fought to control it, to slow it down. Panic was a waste of energy and oxygen. Then she heard a sound, the scrape of a boot on stone coming from a passage deeper in the cave system. A light appeared, a steady, white beam from a flashlight. It grew brighter, resolving into a figure. He was tall and lean, dressed in practical, dark clothing. He had taken off the mask and goggles. His face was unremarkable, almost forgettable, with thin lips and pale, intelligent eyes. He looked to be in his late 40s. He carried a bottle of water and a small, sealed plastic container. He was Caleb Vance. He stopped about 10 feet from her, his expression unreadable, clinical. He wasn't looking at her like a person. He was looking at her like a specimen under a microscope. "You are awake," he said. His voice was calm, neutral, with a precise, almost academic diction. "Good. I was beginning to worry the dosage was miscalculated." "Who are you?" Anya demanded, her voice stronger now, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. "What do you want?" "My name is unimportant," he said, ignoring her second question. He set the water bottle down on the floor just out of her reach. "I am conducting an experiment. You are the primary subject." "An experiment," she repeated, incredulous. "You call this an experiment? You murdered my colleague." Caleb showed no reaction to the accusation. Subject D1 was a variable which has been eliminated. His behavior was predictable, his panic response rudimentary. He contaminated the control group. You, however, you are different. You are rational. You are disciplined. Your psychological degradation will be far more interesting to observe. He opened the plastic container. Inside was a nutrient bar, the same kind they had in the truck. He placed it next to the water bottle. "You will need to maintain your strength. The next phase of the experiment requires you to be in good physical health." "I'm not your lab rat," she spat, pulling at her bonds uselessly. "Oh, but you are," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You have been since you entered my laboratory. This desert is my laboratory, Dr. Sharma, and in it I am God." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the passage until both he and his light were gone, plunging her back into darkness. She was left with the sight of the water and food, a cruel offering placed just beyond her grasp. The psychological torture had begun. She laid her head back against the cold stone, the man's words echoing in the darkness. "I am God." He was insane, a highly intelligent, methodical, organized psychopath, the most dangerous kind, and she was trapped in his lair, a rat in a maze designed by a madman. For the first time, a sliver of genuine, soul-crushing despair pierced her scientific detachment, but she fought it back. He wanted to observe her degradation. She would not give him the satisfaction. She would fight. She would think. She would find a way out. She had to. Chapter 12. The Watcher's Throne. The state police helicopter beat the air into submission, its rotors kicking up a blinding storm of salt and dust as it landed near the established command post. Out stepped Captain Davies, a man whose crisp, clean uniform and polished shoes looked absurdly out of place in the gritty wasteland. Sheriff Miller and Grant Hemlock met him. Davies was all brisk efficiency, unrolling maps on the hood of his vehicle, barking orders into his radio. He was establishing a command structure, organizing grid searches, treating it like a textbook operation. Grant watched him with a look of cold disdain. "We'll have eyes on every inch of this basin by noon," Davies announced confidently. "If she's out here, we'll find her." "He's not in the basin," Grant said, his voice a low counterpoint to the captain's bluster. "He's in the mesas, and your helicopter will just tell him you're coming." Davies gave Grant a condescending look. "And you know this how, Mr. Hemlock?" "Because that's what I would do," Grant replied, his pale eyes locking with the captain. "This is his ground. He has the advantage. You're playing his game by his rules." Ignoring Grant, Davies dispatched his teams. Kenna watched them go, a convoy of official vehicles spreading out to search the empty flats. It felt wrong. It felt like a performance, a loud, pointless show for an audience of one, hidden in the rocks miles away. Grant turned to her. "They won't find anything down here. The answer is up there." He nodded towards the northern mesas, a jagged line of rock against the sharp blue sky. Specifically, he was looking at the one Jedediah had called the Watcher's throne. "You can't go up there alone, Grant," Kenna said. "I'm not," he replied, giving her a pointed look. "I'm requisitioning a deputy." Before she could protest, he turned and strode towards Sheriff Miller. "Brody, I need her. She knows the terrain, and she's the only one here who's been thinking straight since this started." Miller looked from Grant's unyielding face to Kenna's determined one. He knew it was against regulations. He knew Davies would have his hide for it, but he also knew Grant was right. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Don't get yourselves killed. Check in every hour." They took Grant's Bronco, leaving the noise and officialdom of the command post behind. They drove towards the mesas, the ride silent and tense. Grant handled the vehicle like an extension of his own body, navigating the treacherous, rock-strewn terrain with practiced ease. He parked the vehicle in a deep arroyo, camouflaging it with a dusty tarp. "From here we walk," he said, pulling two backpacks from the rear. He handed one to Kenna. It was heavy, filled with water, ropes, and climbing gear. He slung a rifle over his own shoulder. "What's the plan?" Kenna asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We don't take the easy way up," Grant said, pointing to a sheer rock face which looked nearly impossible to climb. "He'll be watching the natural ascents the game trails. We're going to come at him from an angle he won't expect, from behind." The climb was brutal. The rock was sharp and crumbling in places. The sun beat down on them, reflecting off the stone with a blinding intensity. Grant moved with a tireless, methodical grace, testing every handhold, every foothold before putting his weight on it. Kenna followed, her muscles screaming in protest, her lungs burning. This was Grant's world. He was as much a creature of this rock as the lizards which skittered away from their path. After 3 hours of grueling ascent, they reached a narrow ledge just below the mesa's flat top. They were hidden from below, and hopefully from above. Grant pulled out his binoculars, inching forward until he could peer over the edge. He scanned the flat top of the mesa for a long time. It was a landscape of stunted, wind-twisted junipers and strange rock formations. Then he stopped, focusing on a spot near the opposite edge, the one which overlooked the crying basin. "Found him," he whispered, his voice tight. Kenna crawled up beside him. Grant handed her the binoculars. "Don't skyline yourself," he warned. She put the binoculars to her eyes, her hands trembling slightly. She found what he was looking at. It was a shallow cave, its mouth partially obscured by a rock fall. Tucked inside was a spotting scope on a heavy tripod, pointed directly at the basin where the search was underway. Next to it, a small tent was pitched. A thin solar panel was laid out on a rock, wires running into the cave. It was a sniper's nest, a vulture's perch. There was no sign of the man himself or of Anya. "He's here," Kenna breathed. "We found him." "We found his nest," Grant corrected, taking the binoculars back. "He's not stupid enough to stay in one place. He'll have bolt holes, other observation posts." His eyes scanned the surrounding area. "But this is his throne. He'll be back." He looked at Kenna, his expression grim. "Now we wait, and we hope he brings her with him." Chapter 13. A Diet of Fear. Days bled into one another in the twilight cave. Anya lost track of time. Her world was reduced to a primal cycle: thirst, hunger, the dull ache of her bonds, and the brief, terrifying appearances of her captor. Caleb came once a day. He never spoke more than a few sentences. He would untie her hands, allow her to drink a measured amount of water, and eat a single nutrient bar under his watchful gaze. He would then retie her, the knots always perfect, inescapable. The brief moments of freedom, the ability to rub her chafed wrists, were a torment in themselves, a fleeting taste of what she had lost. "Your pulse is elevated," he commented one day, his fingers lightly touching the side of her neck. His touch was cold, clinical, and it sent a wave of revulsion through her. "But your respiration is controlled. You are adapting, fascinating." He had started leaving a recording device near her, a small silver box which ran continuously. At first, she remained silent, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. But the silence, the absolute, unchanging silence of the cave, began to wear her down. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break the human mind. She started talking to herself, her voice a low murmur. She recited geological tables, chemical formulas, the names of her long-dead professors. Anything to fill the void, to remind herself of who she was. She knew he was listening to the recordings. He was studying her, analyzing her descent into despair as if it were a data set. One day, he brought something new. He placed a chessboard on the floor between them. The pieces were hand-carved from pale, salt-pitted bone and dark, volcanic rock. "I grow weary of monologue," he said, setting up the pieces. "A game of skill will provide a more nuanced psychological portrait. Your move, Doctor." Anya stared at the board. It was another test, another of his sick games. If she refused, he might withhold her water. If she played, she was participating in her own torture. She thought for a moment, then made her decision. "I will play," she said, her voice hoarse. "But if I win, you answer one of my questions." Caleb considered this, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Acceptable terms. She was a decent chess player, her father had taught her. She played a careful, defensive game. Caleb played with aggressive, unorthodox brilliance. He sacrificed pieces with apparent recklessness, creating complex, inescapable traps. He was a predator on the board, just as he was in the desert. He beat her easily. "No questions today, Doctor," he said, sweeping the pieces from the board. They played every day after that. She lost every game. Each loss was another small crack in her resolve. The games were not a distraction. They were an extension of her imprisonment, a daily reminder of his intellectual dominance. But she was a scientist. She began to study him. She noted his reliance on intimidating, high-risk gambits. She saw how he reacted when she made an unexpected move, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. She was learning his patterns, his psychology. The chessboard was the only part of this world where she had any agency at all. One session, she changed her strategy. Instead of playing defensively, she attacked. She sacrificed her own pieces, mirroring his reckless style, creating chaos on the board. The move surprised him. His brow furrowed in concentration. The game became a bloody, tactical brawl. It lasted for hours. In the end, he won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. He was left with only a king and a single pawn. She had pushed him to the very edge. "You are learning," he said, and for the first time she detected a hint of something other than clinical detachment in his voice. It might have been respect. "Now my question," she said, her heart pounding. She had lost the game, but she had earned something. He nodded slowly. "One question." She took a breath. She could ask why he was doing this. She could ask about the other victims. But she needed something practical, something she could use. "My colleague," she said, her voice steady. "Ben, why did you leave him on the roof of the truck?" Caleb was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "Aesthetics," he said finally, "and communication. The authorities are simple creatures. They understand displays of power. Leaving him on the ground would have been untidy. Leaving him on the roof was a statement, a signature. It turns a simple crime into a work of art." Anya felt a chill run down her spine. He wasn't just a killer. He was an artist, and human suffering was his medium. As he stood to leave, she noticed something for the first time. Tucked into his belt was a small, leather-bound book. His logbook, the record of his experiments. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form in her mind. If she could get that book, it would be his confession. It would be the proof the world needed, and it might be her only way out. The chessboard was a battlefield, but the real war was for that book. Chapter 14. A Trap of Patience. For 2 days, Grant and Kenna remained on the ledge, a silent, two-person surveillance team. They moved only to shift their cramped muscles, spoke only in hushed whispers. They rationed their water and food, their vigil a microcosm of the survival ordeal their quarry was enduring somewhere below them in the rock. The command post in the basin was a hive of fruitless activity. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky. Search teams on foot and in ATVs combed the flats. They found nothing. It was exactly as Grant had predicted. "He knows we're here," Kenna whispered on the second afternoon, her voice raspy from disuse. "Why hasn't he come back to his nest?" "Because he's patient," Grant replied, his eyes never leaving the cave mouth across the mesa. "He knows we're impatient. He's waiting for us to make a mistake, to get sloppy, to give up and leave." And what if he has another way out? What if he's already gone? "He hasn't," Grant said with certainty. "This is his throne. His trophies are here, his logbooks, his scope. A man like this doesn't abandon his sanctuary." He paused. He's testing us, same way he tests his victims. The waiting was a form of torture. The sun beat down, the hours crawled by. Kenna found her thoughts drifting, her focus blurring. She thought about the dead vlogger, the boy on the roof, the missing woman. This killer was a ghost, a phantom who used the desert itself as an accomplice. How could they possibly catch him? On the evening of the second day, they saw movement. Grant stiffened, his body going rigid. Contact. Kenna raised her own binoculars. A figure emerged from the shadows of a narrow canyon on the far side of the mesa. It was him. He was moving cautiously, pausing to scan his surroundings before proceeding. He was not carrying Anya. He was alone. He walked to his cave, disappearing inside. Minutes later, he re-emerged without the rifle he had been carrying. He walked to the edge of the mesa and stood for a long time, looking down at the futile search in the basin below. Even from this distance, his posture radiated a kind of arrogant ownership. "Where is she?" Kenna breathed. "She's in a different location," Grant whispered, his mind working furiously. "A second site, probably underground. A place where our helicopters can't spot her and she can't call for help. He comes here to use his scope to watch us. This is his command center, not his prison." This changed everything. They couldn't just wait for him to lead them to her. They had to act. They had to get inside that cave. "He's comfortable," Grant said, a plan forming in his eyes. "He thinks he's safe. We're going to use that tonight." The plan was simple. It was terrifying. Kenna would remain on the ledge, acting as a lookout. Grant would use the cover of darkness to cross the top of the mesa and rappel down the cliff face directly above the killer's cave. He would wait until the man was asleep, then make his move. "It's too risky," Kenna argued. "If he hears you, if he wakes up." "He won't," Grant said, his voice a flat line of certainty. "I'm a better hunter than he is." As darkness fell, a moonless, star-swallowing black, Grant made his preparations. He checked his ropes, his harness, his gear. He moved with a silent, deadly purpose. He gave Kenna a small, single-earpiece radio. "Keep your eyes on that cave," he instructed. "If you see his light go out for more than an hour, he's asleep. If you see him leave, you warn me. If you hear a gunshot, you call for backup and you get the hell off this mountain. Understood?" Kenna nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. "Good," he said. He gave her shoulder a single, firm squeeze. Then he melted into the darkness, a ghost moving against the rock. Kenna was alone on the ledge. Her vigil had become infinitely more terrifying. She was no longer just watching. She was the lifeline for the man who was walking into the lion's den. She put the binoculars to her eyes and stared at the cave, her world shrinking to that single point of light in the overwhelming darkness. She began to pray. Chapter 15. The Logbook. The light in Caleb's cave went out at 1:17 a.m. Kenna marked the time. For the next hour she didn't move, didn't breathe. She watched the black rectangle of the cave mouth, her imagination filling it with horrors. Was he asleep? Was it a trap? At 2:20 a.m. her radio crackled to life with a single whispered word from Grant. "Moving." Kenna's heart leaped into her throat. She gripped her binoculars, her knuckles white. She scanned the cliff face above the cave, but it was too dark to see anything. Grant was a ghost, somewhere on the rock. From his position, anchored to a sturdy juniper tree 50 feet above the cave, Grant began his descent. He moved with agonizing slowness, letting the rope slide through his gloved hands an inch at a time. He made no sound. He was a spider, lowering himself on a single thread of silk. He reached the lip of the cave entrance and paused, hanging in the darkness. He listened. From inside, he could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of steady breathing. The man was asleep. He unclipped a small, fiber-optic camera from his belt, a tool he normally used to search for victims in collapsed structures. He carefully fed the thin, flexible cable into the cave. The image appeared on a small screen strapped to his wrist, a small chamber, a sleeping bag, the dark shape of a man, and on a flat rock near the man's head, a small, leather-bound book, the logbook. This was the primary objective. Grant knew he couldn't take Caleb down here, not without risking Anya's life. Caleb was the only one who knew where she was. He needed proof. He needed leverage. He needed that book. He pulled the camera back and took a deep, steadying breath. This was the most dangerous part. He had to enter the cave, take the book, and get out, all without waking the man sleeping less than 10 feet away. He lowered himself the rest of the way, his boots touching the rock floor of the cave with the softness of falling leaves. He unclipped from the rope, his senses on fire. The air was cool and smelled of stone and the man's sweat. The breathing was a steady, soft metronome in the silence. He moved in a low crouch, placing each foot with surgical precision. 1 step, 2 steps. He was beside the sleeping bag. The man didn't stir. Grant reached out a trembling hand, his fingers closing around the smooth leather of the logbook. He lifted it. It was heavier than he expected. He had it. He began his retreat, moving backwards, 1 slow step at a time. He was almost at the cave mouth when his foot brushed against a loose stone. It was a tiny sound, a pebble skittering a few inches across the floor. But in the absolute silence, it sounded like an avalanche. The breathing in the sleeping bag stopped. In an instant, Caleb was awake. He didn't sit up. He didn't shout. He rolled, a silent, fluid motion, his hand emerging from the sleeping bag holding a large knife. He moved with a speed that was utterly inhuman. Grant had a split second to react. He didn't go for his gun, too slow. He lunged forward, not away, using his body weight to crash into Caleb, slamming him back against the rock wall. The knife clattered to the floor. Caleb grunted, the air forced from his lungs. Grant didn't hesitate. He brought his fist around in a hard, vicious arc, connecting with Caleb's temple. The man's eyes rolled back and he went limp, slumping to the floor, unconscious. Grant stood over him, panting, adrenaline singing in his veins. He had the book. He had the man, but he still didn't have Anya. He picked up the knife and the logbook. He keyed his radio. "Kenna," he gasped, his voice ragged. "I have him. He's unconscious, but we have a problem. We need to find her and we need to do it before he wakes up." He shone his flashlight around the small cave, his beam falling on the neat stacks of equipment, the supplies, the maps. This was a man who planned everything. There had to be a clue. His light fell on the chessboard, still set up from his last game with Anya. One of the pieces, a black knight, was out of place. It had been moved from its proper square to the very edge of the board. It was pointing towards a section of the far wall which looked like solid rock. Chapter 16. The Black Knight's Gambit. The wall, Grant. What about the wall? Kenna's voice, tight with tension, crackled in his ear. Grant moved the beam of his flashlight back to the far wall of the cave, where the out-of-place chess piece pointed. At first glance, it looked like solid, unbroken rock, a natural dead end. But Caleb was a creature of precision and deception. Nothing in his world was what it seemed. Grant ran his hand over the rock's surface. It was cold and rough. He pushed against it, solid. He knelt, his light tracing the seam where the wall met the floor. He saw it then. A faint, almost invisible line in the dust, a perfect semicircle, as if something had scraped against the floor there many, many times. Following the line, he examined the rock face more closely. He found the trigger. It wasn't a button or a lever. It was a small, oddly shaped rock protrusion, a natural knob of stone which was slightly darker than the rock around it. It looked like a handhold, nothing more. Grant remembered Jedediah's words. The mesas are like honeycomb. This wasn't a wall. It was a door. He gripped the rock knob and twisted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of grinding stone, a section of the wall began to pivot inwards, revealing a dark, narrow passageway beyond. The air which flowed out was colder, staler, and carried a faint, metallic scent like old blood. "I'm in," Grant whispered into his radio. "It's a tunnel. He has a whole system back here." He glanced at the unconscious form of Caleb Vance. The man was a monster, but he was a brilliant one. He had built his lair inside the bones of the earth. "What about him?" Kenna asked. "He's not going anywhere." Grant took a pair of heavy-duty zip-tie restraints from his pack and secured Caleb's hands and feet, pulling them brutally tight. He couldn't risk the man waking up and following him. He took Caleb's knife and flashlight, then faced the yawning darkness of the tunnel. This was where he kept Anya. This was the true heart of the maze. "Kenna, I'm going in. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, you call it in. Tell them there's a hidden entrance. Tell them to bring the heavy gear." "Grant, don't. Wait for backup." "There's no time," he said, his voice grim. "She's been down here for days. God knows what condition she's in." He clicked on Caleb's flashlight, its powerful beam cutting into the oppressive black, and stepped through the stone door. The passage was narrow, clearly man-made in places. The natural lava tubes widened and smoothed. Wires for electric lights were pinned to the walls, though they were currently dark. Caleb must have cut the power. The tunnel sloped downwards, twisting and turning. Every few yards, another passage branched off, creating a confusing, disorienting labyrinth. Grant realized with a cold dread that without Caleb, finding Anya in this maze would be almost impossible. The out-of-place chess piece wasn't just a clue. It was a trap. Caleb had probably assumed that if he were ever caught, his captors would get lost in his maze, giving him time to escape. But Anya was not a passive victim. She was a scientist, a strategist. She had left the clue, the Black Knight. It wasn't pointing at the door. It was telling him how to navigate the maze. A knight's move in chess, 2 squares in one direction, then 1 square perpendicular, L-shaped. He reached the first intersection. 2 tunnels branched off. He chose the one on the left, walking forward, counting his paces. 1, 2, he stopped. Another tunnel branched off to his right. 1, he took it. He was following the knight's path. He continued this way, moving deeper into the earth. 2 forward, 1 left. 2 left, 1 forward. The air grew colder. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own boots and his own harsh breathing. He passed side chambers filled with supplies, tools, even a small, diesel-powered generator. This was more than a hideout. It was a self-sufficient world, built for a king who ruled an empire of one. Finally, after a dozen turns, the pattern led him to a heavy steel door, a submarine-style hatch with a spinning wheel lock. It was incongruous, a piece of industrial hardware buried in the ancient rock. This had to be it. He grabbed the wheel and turned. It was stiff, but it moved. With a loud clank, the locks disengaged. He pulled the heavy door open. The room inside was small, bare rock. In the center of the floor, chained to a thick iron ring bolted into the stone, was Anya Sharma. She was pale, thin, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. But she was alive. She was looking at him. "It took you long enough," she rasped, a faint, wry smile touching her cracked lips. Grant felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He rushed to her side, his flashlight beam falling on the heavy chains around her ankles. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands already working on the locks. "Only my dignity," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "He's a talker and a terrible chess player." Grant looked at her, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. He had come down here expecting to find a broken victim. Instead, he had found a survivor, a fighter. As he worked on the last lock, he heard a sound from the steel door behind him. A soft, metallic click. He froze. The door swung shut with a deep, final thud. A second, heavier clang echoed through the chamber as an external locking bar slammed into place. They were trapped. Caleb's final gambit. He hadn't been unconscious. He had been playing possum, waiting, giving them just enough time to find the cell before springing his last, perfect trap. Grant's radio was useless this deep underground. They were buried alive in a soundproof, steel-lined tomb at the mercy of the man who controlled the maze. Chapter 17. The Crying Basin. "Grant, Grant, come in, do you copy?" Kenna's whispered pleas into the radio were met with static. One moment she was listening to his triumphant report that he had found Anya. The next, an abrupt silence. She knew, with a certainty which chilled her to the bone, what had happened. The trap had been sprung. She stared across the dark mesa at the cave entrance. There was no light, no sound. Grant and Anya were in there, buried in the rock, and the monster was awake. Her training screamed at her to follow orders, call for backup, wait, but her gut screamed louder. There was no time. That man, Caleb, wouldn't just leave them trapped. He would go down there and finish it. She was the only thing standing between him and them. She made a decision. It was reckless. It was stupid. It was probably a death sentence. But she was a cop. She wasn't going to sit on a ledge while people were in danger. She took her service pistol from its holster, the familiar weight a small comfort in her hand. She double-checked the spare magazines on her belt. She slung her own rifle, a standard-issue patrol carbine, over her shoulder. Taking a deep breath, she began to make her way across the top of the mesa, moving from rock to shadow, a ghost in the darkness. She reached the cave entrance, her heart hammering. The air flowing out of it was cold. She took a small, high-powered flashlight from her belt, holding it alongside her pistol in a classic two-handed grip. She stepped inside. The main chamber was empty. The sleeping bag was rumpled. A pair of cut zip ties lay on the floor. The stone door to the inner passages stood open. He was in the maze, hunting them. She hesitated at the threshold. Jedediah's map was a vague memory. Grant's chess move directions were a puzzle she didn't have time to solve. Going in was suicide. Then she saw the logbook. Grant must have dropped it in the struggle. It lay near the entrance, its leather cover gleaming in her flashlight beam. She snatched it up, proof, evidence, a confession. But it was useless if none of them made it out alive. She backed out of the cave, her mind racing. She couldn't fight him in the tunnels. That was his world. She had to draw him out, lure him onto her territory. But how? An idea sparked, born of desperation. She looked down from the mesa at the crying basin below. She saw the lights of the command post, the searching vehicles, an audience. Caleb was an artist, a performer. He needed an audience. She keyed her radio, switching to the main county frequency. "Sheriff Miller, this is Deputy Washington. Do you copy?" Miller's voice came back instantly, sharp with worry. "Kenna, what the hell is going on? Where, Hemlock?" "No time, Sheriff," she said, her voice hard and clear. "The suspect is Caleb Vance. He's here on the northern mesa. He has Grant and Dr. Sharma trapped underground. I need you to do exactly what I say. Pull everyone back. All vehicles, all personnel. Pull them back to the highway. I want the basin completely dark and empty in 20 minutes. "What, Kenna, what are you planning?" "I'm setting a new stage," she said, her eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the cave. "And I'm going to make him the main attraction." She didn't wait for his reply. She holstered her pistol and scrambled down the rocks from the cave entrance. She moved with a desperate speed, heading not for the sheer cliff Grant had used, but for a steep, treacherous game trail which led down into the basin. She reached the bottom, her legs shaking, her lungs burning. The basin was vast and silent. In the distance, she could see the lights of the command post beginning to recede. Miller was trusting her. She was alone. She walked to the center of the salt pan, to the spot where the Geocorps truck still stood, a silent monument to the horror that had unfolded here. She took a deep breath, raised her pistol, and fired 2 shots into the air. The sound was immense, a flat, cracking report which echoed off the distant mesas. It was an invitation, a challenge. Then she turned on her flashlight and placed it on the ground, pointing straight up, creating a single, defiant pillar of light in the overwhelming darkness. A spotlight. She stood beside it, took the logbook from her belt, and opened it. She was the bait, and she was about to read the monster's diary to the entire world. Chapter 18. A reading from the Book of the Dead. Deep within the earth, the sound of the gunshots was a faint, muffled thump-thump. Caleb Vance, standing outside the steel door of the prison cell, heard it. He smiled. The little deputy was being creative. He had underestimated her. Inside the cell, Grant and Anya heard it too. "What was that?" Anya asked, her voice tight. "That," Grant said, a grim smile on his own face, "is our backup." He started examining the steel door, looking for any weakness, any flaw in its construction. There was none. It was a perfect trap. Caleb was in no hurry. He had them. They were his. He could finish them at his leisure, but the deputy, she had intrigued him. She had found his logbook. He knew this because he had purposefully left it where she would find it, another piece in the game. He wanted to see what she would do with it. He made his way back through the labyrinth, his movements unhurried. He emerged from the cave onto the mesa top and picked up his spotting scope. It was too dark to use the obsidian lens, so he attached the night vision eyepiece. He focused it on the basin below. He saw her, a single, small figure bathed in the beam of an upturned flashlight. She was standing by the truck where he had left the body of subject D1, and she was holding his logbook. Then through the scope, he saw her bring a radio to her lips. Her voice, amplified by every police radio in the county, echoed faintly from the distant highway. It was a clear, steady voice, filled with cold fury. "Attention all personnel," she began. "I am reading from a logbook found at the suspect's primary observation post. Entry dated 6 weeks ago. Subject B3, couple tourists. Vehicle disabled via brake line severance. Female subject expired T plus 15. Male subject terminated T plus 18. Method, blunt force trauma. Disposal, geothermal vent, quadrant B2. Caleb stiffened. She wasn't just reading it. She was broadcasting it. She was taking his private work, his art, and turning it into a common police blotter. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over him. This was a violation. Kenna kept reading, her voice never wavering. She read the entry for Cade Jennings, the vlogger. She detailed the precise, clinical observations of his slow, agonizing death. She gave voice to the voiceless, turning Caleb's secret trophies into public accusations. Subject C4 expired T plus 12. Cessation of movement at 21:48. Observations. Subject exhibited classic symptoms of psychological collapse, including conversations with a projected imaginary hostile. The Shimmer Man. The name hung in the air. The myth he had cultivated for himself, spoken aloud, stripped of its power. He had to stop her. He couldn't let her profane his work this way. He grabbed his rifle. The tranquilizer gun was for subjects, this was for pests, and started down the game trail, moving with a silent, deadly speed. The hunter had become the hunted, drawn out of his fortress by the one thing he could not tolerate, the desecration of his art. Kenna saw him coming, a dark shape detaching itself from the mesa, moving down the trail with an unnatural swiftness. She kept reading, her voice a steady anchor in the terrifying silence. New entry. Subject D1, male Carter. Subject D2, female Sharma. Vehicle disabled at 0732. D1 exhibits agitation. D2 exhibits controlled response. She will be a more challenging subject. He was getting closer now, a wraith gliding over the salt. Kenna's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground. She was no longer just a deputy. She was the voice of his victims. She was their final witness. A subject D1 terminated, disposal method display, a statement, a signature, a work of art. He was 100 yards away. She could see the long barrel of his rifle. She dropped the logbook, drew her pistol, and snapped her carbine from her shoulder, clicking off the safety. The pillar of light from the flashlight put her in a perfect spotlight, but it also blinded him to anything outside its beam. He was coming into a kill zone of her own design. "Caleb Vance," she shouted, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't feel. "In the name of the Indio County Sheriff's Department, drop your weapon. You are under arrest." For an answer, a muzzle flash bloomed in the darkness. The shot went wide, the bullet kicking up a spray of salt a few feet to her left. He was aiming for the flashlight. He wanted to plunge her back into his world, the world of darkness. Kenna didn't hesitate. She dropped to one knee, brought her carbine to her shoulder, and fired. Chapter 19. An Equation of Force. The exchange was brutal and short. Kenna's shot was aimed at center mass, a trained, instinctive response. Caleb, moving with a liquid grace, half-stepped, and the round tore through the fleshy part of his left shoulder instead of his chest. He grunted in pain, the impact spinning him around, but he didn't go down. He was tough, wiry, fueled by a fanatic's rage. He returned fire, a wild shot from the hip. The bullet ricocheted off the hood of the Geocore truck with a high-pitched scream. Kenna scrambled behind the vehicle, using the engine block for cover. The spotlight was gone, the flashlight shattered by Caleb's first shot. They were plunged into a darkness broken only by the faint, ambient starlight. Her tactical advantage was gone. Now they were on his terms. She could hear him moving, his boots crunching on the salt, circling the truck. He was trying to flank her. She pressed herself against the truck's chassis, trying to make herself a smaller target, her ears straining to pinpoint his location. "You have no appreciation for the work, deputy," he hissed, his voice a disembodied sound in the dark. "You read the words, but you don't understand the poetry, the purity of it." "The only thing I understand is you're a murderer," she called back, trying to keep him talking, trying to get a lock on his position. "I am a scientist, an artist. I was creating a definitive record of the human animal under ultimate stress. And you trampled all over it with your clumsy, bureaucratic feet." A shot rang out, closer this time. A bullet punched through the truck's side panel, missing Kenna by inches. He was to her right. She crab-walked silently to her left, putting more of the vehicle between them. Meanwhile, in the underground cell, Grant and Anya had been working. The gunshots above were a ticking clock. "The door opens inward," Grant observed, running his hands over the smooth steel. "The hinges are on this side. If we can pop the pins, we can get it open." "They'll be pressure-fitted steel," Anya said, her mind, now focused on a solvable problem, working with brilliant clarity. "We need a counterforce, a wedge, something we can use as a lever." There was nothing in the bare cell, nothing but the chains, the iron ring, and the rock itself. "The ring," Anya said, her eyes gleaming with an idea. "The ring he chained me to, if we can break it out of the rock." It was a desperate, impossible idea, but it was the only one they had. They took turns kicking at the rock around the base of the iron bolt, using the heels of their boots. The rock was hard, but it was sedimentary stone, layered with fracture points. After 10 minutes of punishing work, a crack appeared. They focused their efforts, their kicks becoming more precise. The crack widened. With a final, desperate kick from Grant, a huge chunk of the floor broke loose. The iron ring with a foot of stone still attached to its base was free. It was immensely heavy. "Now for the lever," Grant grunted, muscles straining as they lifted the makeshift sledgehammer. They wedged the iron ring into the tiny gap between the door and its frame, near the top hinge. "It's all about physics, Doctor," Grant panted. "An equation of force." "Let's solve it," she replied. They put their combined weight on the stone base, using it as a lever. The steel door groaned in protest. The top hinge creaked, the metal straining, bending under the immense, focused pressure. With a sound like a thunderclap, the top pin sheared off. The door sagged, held only by the bottom hinge. They had an opening, a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Above, the deadly cat-and-mouse game continued. Kenna knew she couldn't stay behind the truck forever. He would eventually get a clean shot. She had one advantage left: surprise. She took a spare magazine from her belt and threw it as hard as she could towards the front of the truck. It clattered loudly on the salt flats. Caleb, thinking she was moving, fired 2 quick shots in that direction. In that split second, while he was distracted, Kenna moved. She didn't run away. She ran towards him. She rounded the back of the truck, her carbine up ready. He was 20 feet away, already turning back towards her, a look of surprise on his face. He brought his rifle up. She was faster. She fired twice. The first round hit him in the leg, buckling it. The second hit him square in the chest. He staggered backwards, a look of profound, almost academic curiosity on his face as he looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his shirt. He fell to his knees, his rifle clattering to the salt. He looked at her, his pale eyes searching for an answer. "Incomplete data," he whispered. Then he pitched forward, face down on the salt, and was still. Kenna stood over him, her rifle trained on his body, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. The silence of the desert rushed back in, vast and absolute. She keyed her radio, her voice shaking. "Sheriff, suspect is down. I repeat, suspect is down." Chapter 20. The First Step into the Sun. As Miller's voice acknowledged her transmission, a new sound reached Kenna. A loud, metallic screeching from the direction of the mesa. She turned, her rifle still at the ready, her heart still pounding. A figure emerged from the darkness at the base of the rock, tall, limping, covered in dust. Grant. He was supporting a second, smaller figure, Anya. They had freed themselves. Kenna ran towards them, a wave of relief so powerful it felt like a physical blow. The three of them met in the middle of the salt flats, a small, exhausted island of survivors in the immense darkness. "Is it over?" Grant asked, his voice a raw whisper. Kenna nodded towards the still form by the truck. "It's over." They didn't speak further. There were no words for what they had endured. They stood together for a long moment, simply breathing the cool night air, letting the silence wash over them. Then, in the distance, they saw the approaching lights of the convoy. The world was rushing back in. The aftermath was a blur of official procedure. Paramedics, forensics teams, state police. Anya and Grant were checked over, their injuries minor, their exhaustion profound. Kenna gave her statement, handing over the rifle and the logbook, which was now Exhibit A in the case of the decade. As the sun began to rise, casting its first clean, golden light over the crying basin, Kenna saw Anya standing by one of the ambulances, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the salt flats. She was no longer looking at the mesas with fear, but with the cool, appraising eye of a geologist, a survivor. Kenna walked over to her. "Are you okay?" Anya turned, a small, weary smile on her face. "I've had better fieldwork trips." She looked at Kenna, her gaze direct and filled with a quiet, powerful gratitude. The chess piece, the knight, that was for him, to lead him into the trap. I never thought anyone else would understand. Grant understood, Kenna said. He said you were a fighter. I'm a scientist, Anya corrected gently. I observed, I analyzed, and I acted based on the data. Your killer, Caleb, he thought he was the one running the experiment. But in the end, we were all just variables in an equation. He just couldn't solve for us. A medical helicopter was landing to transport Anya to a hospital for evaluation. Before she boarded, she turned back to Kenna. "If you ever want to leave this desert," she said, "call me. Geocor could use a security consultant with your particular skill set." Kenna watched the helicopter lift off, its blades stirring up the salt one last time before it banked towards the east and the rising sun. Grant was sitting in the back of an ambulance, finally allowing a paramedic to look at his bruised ribs. Sheriff Miller walked over and stood beside Kenna, looking at the body of Caleb Vance being zipped into a bag. "You did good, Kenna," Miller said, his voice filled with a paternal pride which embarrassed her. "Damn good." "Just doing my job, Sheriff," she replied, though she knew it was more than that. The desert had tested her, taken her to the very edge, and she hadn't broken. She had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked first. She looked out at the vast, empty expanse. It no longer seemed menacing. It was just a place of salt and stone, of heat and silence. It held no power on its own. The horror had come from the man, from the darkness he carried inside him. And now he was gone. The desert was clean again. The crying basin was quiet now, the only sound the gentle morning breeze. The ghosts had been exorcised. Kenna took a deep breath of the fresh, cool air. For the first time in a long time, it felt like a new day. Chapter 21: The Echo Chamber. The days that followed were a different kind of assault. The quiet, personal horror of the crying basin was replaced by the loud, invasive horror of the outside world. News vans and satellite trucks clogged the highway, a flock of vultures of a different breed. The FBI arrived, setting up a mobile command center and absorbing the case, their crisp suits and bureaucratic jargon a stark contrast to Sheriff Miller's weary pragmatism. Caleb Vance's cave, the Watcher's throne, became a massive, intricate crime scene. Specialists in Tyvek suits descended into the labyrinth, their bright lights chasing away the last of the shadows. They mapped the tunnels, cataloged the supplies, and discovered the full extent of Caleb's obsession. They found a small workshop where he ground his own lenses and mixed his chemical darts. They found a soundproofed room with a single chair and restraints, a place for interrogations that were never meant to have a second act. And they found the other logbooks. There were 5 of them, hidden in a false-bottomed supply crate. They detailed 9 other experiments over a span of 6 years, 9 other lives extinguished and clinically recorded. Names were cross-referenced with old missing persons reports from 3 states. Cold cases suddenly ran hot, then turned ice-cold with the grim finality of Caleb's notes. He was not just a local monster. He was a ghost who had haunted the entire American West. Kenna found herself adrift in the storm. She was debriefed by the FBI, by Internal Affairs, by a department-mandated psychologist. She recounted the shootout in the basin over and over, the events hardening into a flat, official narrative which bore little resemblance to the terror of the actual moments. They called it a justified shooting, a clean kill. But at night, she would see his face, the look of academic surprise as the bullets hit, and she would wake up with the taste of salt and gunpowder in her mouth. She went to the department's firing range, trying to reacquaint herself with the tool of her trade, but her hands shook. The loud, controlled reports of the range were too much like the chaotic blasts in the darkness. The smell of the cordite was the smell of his death. She left after firing a single, wild shot which missed the paper target entirely. Grant Hemlock disappeared. After giving his statement, a terse, minimalist account of events, he simply drove away in his Bronco. He didn't answer his phone. Miller told Kenna to leave him be. "Some men are like desert tortoises," the sheriff had said. "When they get hurt, they pull into their shell. He'll come out when he's ready." Anya Sharma, after 2 days in a hospital, became a key resource for the FBI. Her scientific mind and eidetic memory were invaluable in deciphering Caleb's more cryptic notes on geology and navigation. She worked with the federal agents with a detached, professional focus, treating her own traumatic experience as a data set to be analyzed. It was her armor, her own version of Grant's shell. She and Kenna spoke on the phone once. Anya's voice was steady, but there was a new, hard edge to it, like stone which had been put under immense pressure. One afternoon, Kenna stood at the edge of the basin, watching the FBI teams pack up the last of the equipment from the Watcher's throne. They had sealed the entrance with concrete. The mountain was a tomb again, but it felt different. The place was no longer Caleb's. It was a scar on the landscape, a place of grim history. The silence had returned, but it was a heavier silence now, filled with the ghosts of stories told. She thought of the Shimmer Man, the phantom Caleb had used to terrorize his victims. The phantom was gone, but a real one, the ghost of Caleb Vance himself, now felt permanently etched onto this place. Chapter 22: The Geothermal Vent. A week after the FBI left, Grant Hemlock's Bronco pulled up to the station. He looked thinner, his face more weathered than ever, but the obsessive, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, settled exhaustion. He walked into Kenna's office and dropped a map on her desk. It was a copy of one of Caleb's, provided by the FBI. "Subject B3, he said, his voice a low rumble. "The couple from 2 years ago. The logbook said he disposed of them in a geothermal vent in quadrant B2. The feds searched the main vents, found nothing. They think he was lying, covering his tracks. You do? Kenna asked. Vance was many things, Grant said. But he wasn't a liar, not in his work. He was precise. The feds were looking for a big, obvious vent. Vance wouldn't use that. He'd use something small, hidden, forgotten. He tapped a spot on the map far from any marked roads or geological features. Jedediah told me about this place once, a fissure. He called it the Dragon's Breath. Said on cold mornings you could see the steam rising from a mile away. Kenna knew what he was asking. This wasn't an official request. It was a pilgrimage. It was about finishing the job, not just for Subject B3, but for his nephew, for all of them. I'll drive, she said. The journey to Quadrant B2 took them into a part of the desert she had never seen. The salt gave way to shattered, volcanic rock, fields of black, jagged stone which looked like a frozen, stormy sea. It was a harsh, primordial landscape. They found the fissure at the base of a low, crumbling cliff. It was nothing more than a crack in the earth, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. A wave of superheated, sulfurous air washed over them. The dragon's breath. Grant anchored a rope to the bumper of his Bronco and handed the other end to Kenna. Stay up here. Keep a lookout. I need to do this alone. Kenna watched as he strapped on a heat-resistant harness and slowly, carefully, lowered himself into the earth. He was gone for 20 minutes. When his signal came to pull him up, his face was a pale, grim mask, streaked with sweat and grime. He didn't speak for a long time. He just sat on the tailgate of his truck, staring at his dusty boots. I found them, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. He was telling the truth, there, preserved by the heat and the minerals. He looked at Kenna, and for the first time she saw tears welling in his pale eyes. They can go home now, Kenna. We can send them home. On the drive back, the silence in the truck was different. It wasn't tense or heavy. It was peaceful. Grant had not found his nephew, but he had found someone else. He had brought closure to a family who had been living in the hell of the unknown for 2 years. In doing so, he had found a measure of his own. The hunt was finally, truly over. He had found the last of the ghosts and could now let them rest. Chapter 23: The Salt and the Stars. A month later, the first chill of autumn had begun to touch the desert nights. The media had moved on to other tragedies. The crying basin was quiet again. Kenna sat in Sheriff Miller's office. A letter from Geocorp sat on her desk, containing a formal, generous job offer from Anya Sharma, head of corporate security based in Denver. A new life, a way out. You going to take it? Miller asked, leaning back in his chair, his eyes on the letter. I don't know, Kenna admitted. Part of me wants to put this whole county in my rearview mirror. But this is home, she said, looking out the window at the familiar dusty street. I think if I left now, I'd be letting him win. I'd be letting him chase me out. Later that evening, she drove. She didn't drive towards the highway, but back towards the salt flats. She drove with the windows down, letting the cool, clean air wash over her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pastels. She parked at the edge of the pan, the same place she and Grant had stood with Miller when it all began. She got out and walked onto the salt, the familiar crunch of the crust under her boots no longer a sound of menace, but a sound of home. The desert was beautiful. It was vast and quiet and utterly indifferent. It had not been evil. It had simply been the canvas. Caleb Vance had tried to paint it with his own dark, twisted vision to make it his, but he had failed. He was gone, a brief, violent storm that had passed. The desert remained. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Anya. A single image, a high-resolution satellite photo of the Indio County salt flats taken from orbit. Beneath it, a single line of text. Thought you might like to see the whole board. You command it now. Kenna smiled. She looked up from the glowing screen to the real thing. The last light of the sun faded and the first stars appeared, bright and sharp in the clear, dry air. Soon the sky was a brilliant, dizzying dome of light. The salt flats reflected the starlight, creating a faint, ethereal glow, as if the ground itself were luminous. It was not a place of ghosts or monsters. There was no shimmer man in the heat haze. There was only the salt and the stars, her desert, her home. And for the first time since she'd found the vlogger's Jeep, she felt a sense of perfect, profound peace. The end.